Good evening, and welcome to the Bangalore International Centre. Kuvempu turns 120 this year, and we are celebrating with a new translation by Vanamala Viswanatha of his epic novel, Malegalalli Madumagalu, Bride in the Hills, from Penguin Random House. The BIC is pleased to be collaborating with the Rashtrakavi Kuvempu Pratishtana on this important occasion. I would like to acknowledge the presence with us of a member of the Kuvempu family, Kuvempu's granddaughter, Tamala Surendra. Where are you? Other members of the family were out of town, so we're happy that Tamala could join us. You probably saw the statue of Kuvempu from the studio of artist Shashidhar Adappa, that is part of our Karnataka Habba, Krishna to Kaveri, that is happening this weekend. It's right outside the auditorium. Winner of the first Sahitya Academy Award in 1955 and the Jnana Peeth in 1967, Kuvempu Kuppali Venkatappa Puttappa, who lived from 1904 to 1994, inaugurated the non-Brahmin era in modern Kannada writing. His versatile oeuvre includes a vast body of poetry, plays, novels, children's writing, essays, and an autobiography. Malegalalli Madumagalu is set in 1893 in the Malnad region of the Western Ghats. The well-known Kannada writer Devanoora Mahadeva and others have located it in the epic tradition of the Mahabharata and Tolstoy's War and Peace. In this woman-centric text ahead of its time, Kuvempu weaves a vast canvas of seemingly every sentient and insentient thing, a subaltern perspective which also takes in the world of the wealthy and powerful and offers a veritable biodiversity register of the Western Ghats. We have an eminent panel of scholars and writers discussing the book today. Vanamala Viswanatha, the translator, Rajendra Chenni, Arvind Narayan, and Amit Chaudhary. Before I invite them on stage, a couple of quick announcements. For those of you who are here for the first time, the BIC is a space for informed conversation, arts and culture. You can sign up for email notifications of our programs on our website. And I should mention that this weekend, BIC is the place to be with our grand Karnataka Habba featuring talks, dance, music, exhibits, food, and more. And so do check out the schedule on our website and visit us. A quick reminder to please switch off your mobile phones or turn them on silent mode, and to please refrain from texting during the program. And with that, I would like to invite the panelists on stage. I will briefly introduce each one before they speak. Detailed biographies are on the BIC website. Our first speaker for today is Professor Rajendra Chenni, who will lay out the context of the novel. A literary and cultural critic, he was formerly Professor of English at Kuvempu University in Shimoga and is presently the director of the Manasa Center for Cultural Studies in Shimoga. A bilingual writer, he has authored 20 books in Kannada and 6 in English, and among his many honors is the Karnataka State Sahitya Academy Lifetime Achievement Award. At present, he is a member of the Karnataka State Education Policy Commission, which is what has also partly brought him to Bangalore. So we've been lucky to have him here as well. And you've all probably seen his writing on contemporary politics and culture in various publications, including the Deccan Herald, the Hindu, and Frontline. I should also mention that Professor Chenni will be speaking tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m. here at the BIC on his book, State Matters, the story of how Karnataka was born. So over to Professor Chenni.
Let me begin by congratulating Vanamala Viswanatha for her brilliant translation of Kuvempu's massive epic novel, and also for successfully negotiating with multiple challenges which the text confronts the translator with. It's a whole variegated, heterogeneous kind of a social world. I would even say a cosmos of many social worlds. And it's also a depository, I should say, of the many Kannadas that are spoken in Malnad. And it takes us across these divisions of Varna and caste and gender. And therefore, this novel has been considered as probably the greatest novel in the Kannada language. Uh, the reason is Kuvempu himself was one of the founding figures of Kannada Renaissance from the last quarter of the 19th century. He defined Kannada-ness for Karnataka. And in line with the many discourses about Kannada and Kannada Nadu, which found circulation during this period, he felt that Kannadatva or Kannada-ness should be based on the frameworks of a secular, open, tolerant way of life. And this, I think, went a long way in shaping modern Kannada's understanding of itself, understanding of its identity. And he's the single most important author for many reasons. One is that apart from defining for us what Kannadatva would mean in the modern period, he also interrogated the hierarchies in the society around him. First of all, like many of his contemporaries like Shivaram Karant, he took a major decision not to follow the Anand Mat Bankim Chandra model of the nationalist, revivalist kind of a novel. He and Shivaram Karant and others made their choice to write about the local and the regional. It's very interesting because this was happening at a time when nationalist discourses were so very powerfully circulating all over. And the major decision of the Kannada fiction writers was to write about the regional precisely in order to break this binary between the national and the regional. This is one of the important contributions of Kuvempu. And he also educated us in how to confront modernity by developing what I would be describing as a necessary ambivalence towards modernity. It's liberating, but in many ways it's also something that alienates us. This double perspective that Kuvempu developed is a part of the novel that we are reading. I think this is also culturally and a very important thing. And as a writer of fiction, though of course he derives his strength basically from the humanist tradition, which opted for realism, he was the first major writer to break out from the prison of realism in order to reach to the transcendental, to something which is more than what could be described as documentation of what happens in ordinary life. The novel that Vanamala has translated also happens to be an epic of the ordinary, you see. But there are such great epiphanic moments in the novel where the characters are empowered to transcend these prisons of caste and gender and realize that there is a reality which ultimately remains mysterious, but there is a reality. There is an order of existence which may be beyond our comprehension, but to which every ordinary man and woman has a right to claim a legacy. And this is the legacy that we find in Malegalalli Madumagalu. This is also very important. Pratiti introduced Kuvempu by telling us that he was the one who introduced the Shudra world. For the very first time, large number of communities whose social experiences were excluded from not only literacy but also from literature. They found a place in Kuvempu's short stories, novels, and plays. Thereafter, I think Kannada fiction began to be more expansive and more inclusive. This happened especially with his two novels. And this is a very great novel because, though I would say it's characteristic of Kuvempu's way of thinking that he interrogated the past in a very, very serious way, in a very radical way, which I don't think would be accepted in today's society. He did that very boldly and very courageously, but he also believed in the uses of the past. Just what is it that we can retrieve from the past? What is living in the past? He did that, and I would describe Malegalalli Madumagalu, the novel we are discussing here, as the concrete fictional realization of what the great Vachanakaras of the 12th century had said in Karnataka. In Kannada, it reads like this: Sakala Jivatmagala Lesanne Bayasutta, wishing the good of all living things. I think this finds a total comprehensive kind of a realization in Malegalalli Madumagalu, because the natural world, the human world, the social world, the cruel, exploitative, feudal world, and the hell in which some of the bonded laborers are made to live. It's all there in the novel. But at the same time, the great vision behind this novel is that every human being is, has a right over the memories of culture. He may not understand them, he or she may not understand them intellectually, but the experience is not barred to anybody. One of the great things that we find in our novel is Subarna Hegde, who is standing at the pigsty, full of the foul smell, etc. He feels the bodily, visceral pleasure of standing out in the morning, and the narrator says that maybe he is standing near the pigsty, but isn't he a Vishwapraja? Isn't he a citizen of the world, And therefore, the great thing about the novel is that Kuvempu uses a Jungian way, Jungian mode of trying to see how the collective unconscious, a treasure of all human experiences, suddenly becomes available unexpectedly, unpredictably. It becomes available to the common human beings we see, whether it is Timmi eloping with her lover and suddenly looking at the rising sun in the midst of all the clouds, and she doesn't even have the words to describe, but she responds because Kuvempu believes that every human being has this ability to experience even without words. And that helps him to bring into this novel an egalitarian way of looking at life. Because there are I would put it rather in this way. This is a transgressive and I think I would even describe it as a radical novel, mainly because throughout the powerful narrative about so many pairs of lovers, etc., the norms and the normative rules of the society are broken. And the power to break those norms comes from the power of sexuality, because the novel is an unabashed, wonderful celebration of sexuality. As Kuvempu himself says in the novel, whether it is the royal palace or a patched hut, this is something that leads you, something. Even after the so-called modernist Navya tradition, I don't think I can remember a Kannada text which is such a wonderful celebration of sexuality. see, the god of love. This also, I think, makes the novel very important to us. There are many things that one could go on talking about it. Only 2 points, and then I'll join the panel discussion. One of the things is the way in which the novel, among many other things, also talks about the entry of colonial modernity. Though this is a feudal world, unseen, probably never represented, and lost and cocooned between hills, and people living a life which perhaps doesn't take them beyond a few miles. This is where, from a distance, colonial modernity is entering. And as I was saying earlier, there is this very mature, ambivalent view of modernity. If you look at the ending of the novel, the resolution made by the two male characters is that they will no longer, to quote Kuvempu, wash the feet of the Brahmins, but rather they would send their children to school from the next day. You see. But there is also the challenge of the Christian missionaries, the problem of conversion, etc. So the novel is a wonderful novel which gives us, I think, a historical sense also, despite its the wonderful narrative power which just takes you along. You also have one possibility of placing this within a very important historical juncture of transition of a local society, which also makes it very important. Vanamala's translation, can I take the 5 minutes? Okay, you'll give me more time because I'm talking about your translation. Yeah. Vanamala's translation is excellent for the following reasons. First of all, the varied narrative and descriptive registers used by Kuvempu, they are a very big challenge if you're translating the novel into English. I'm talking about the narrative shifts, narrative registers. I'm also talking about this mind-boggling thickness of the details, you see. And the challenge is you should not make them appear anthropological, because K.V. Subbanna, the great critic, said, even a small group of young researchers can go around Malnad and collect all these details, but that is not Malegalalli Madumagalu. That's not the novel. The novel goes beyond that, and you have managed it excellently well. Then there are these many languages which are heard in the novel, in the kitchen, in the toddy shop, then everywhere, you know. And you also have the whispering talk of the lovers in their beds. You also have young women privately talking about the first sexual experience. Yeah, all these, you know, all these. There are these voices, very distinctive voices, and there are these many languages that Kuvempu uses, language in the larger sense of the word, to bring alive the social worlds and also the complexity of the human emotions and the passions. This has come out very well because Kuvempu, he did not believe in constructing one standard kind of a register for fiction. He broke those barriers also. So the translator has to shift from one narrative language to another. You have done it extremely well. These unparalleled specific details have come out. And what has remained with me after I read the novel is the lingering voices, you know. They bring alive those human beings who speak in that way, and they are the voices which are going to remain with you for a long time. Like Vanamala, with bated breath, I am also waiting for responses to this novel from various communities of readers, you see. A novel of this kind has to develop a long biography, each reader adding his own interpretation, each language community responding to it in its original way. I do hope this happens with Malegalalli Madumagalu. I would like to place on record as a Kannada reader my gratitude to Penguin Books for taking up this project, and Kadilal Prakash, president of Kuvempu Pratisthana, has specially asked me, because I come from Shimoga, association with Kuvempu Pratisthana, to wish you all the best and to thank the organizers for this program. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is the translator, Vanamala Viswanatha, an independent scholar and translator who has taught English language and literature for over 4 decades in premier institutions in Bengaluru. She's translated into English well-known Kannada writers such as U.R. Ananthamurthy, Sara Abubakar, Lankesh, and Vaidehi. The Life of Harish Chandra, her translation of a medieval Kannada poetic classic, was published by Harvard University Press and the Murthy Classical Library of India in 2017. A translation fellow at Ashoka University, her current work includes the translation of Vadaradhane, a 10th century Jain text in Kannada, forthcoming from Harvard University Press, Tolpadi's essay collection Meditating on the Mahabharata from Penguin Random House, and of course the text under discussion today, Kuvempu's Bride in the Hills, also from Penguin Random House. So over to Vanamala.
Thanks to BIC and Pratisthana for making this event happen, and to all of you for taking the trouble to come all the way and to be with us, and of course to my fellow panelists. So the first question that comes to mind is why this particular text, and what did it mean to me? What does it mean in the culture? When you choose a text like this, it is no longer just a personal choice. It's of course personal, subjective, but it's not just that. It's also a cultural choice. This is a text, and it's already, Dr. Chenni has already explained to you how important it is to Kannada culture, because it's a text that celebrates the poor and the dispossessed, be it Dalits or women, for their intelligence, resilience, audacity, and humor. In fact, it's a text that enacts for you what the famous Kannada critic D.R. Nagaraja had described as Badavara Naguvina Shakti anta. It's not always with pity that you need to look at the poor, but it's also their ability to laugh, that helps them survive. So here you have all those things, enacted in the novel. And this depiction is done without pity or without exaggeration, but by locating them in their everyday locus of struggle with a plenitude of detail. And as the novel itself opens with this, epigraph at the beginning, no one is important, no one is unimportant, nothing is insignificant. Rahmat Terikere, the Kannada critic, calls this the socialist mission statement of our times. So I'll illustrate it with the way this narrative, which is so woman-centric, deals with women. There are 77 characters in the novel, and at least 50% of them are women. So in Kuvempu's Republic, we don't have to fight for reservation. 33%, 50%, it's more than 50. So that's very nice. There's a whole range of characters, from 5-year-old girls to 15-year-olds to 25-year-olds and 45 and 70, and different kinds of women. There's a whole, universe there. And most importantly, as K.V. Narayana was pointing out the other day, women in Kuvempu are not merely beneficiaries of somebody else's transformation. Usually it's the male, man who initiates the transformation, and women are part of it. Here, it's the women who are agents of change, and men are taken along in this transformative process. And, I would like to, prove what I'm saying about Kuvempu's, focus on women by reading out not the first sentence of the novel, but the last sentence of the novel. And I want you to tell me if you have found this kind of an ending anywhere else in any other book. I'll just borrow the book for a moment from you. So here are two characters. Chinnamma, who is the central character, the bride, one of the brides actually. And she and her friend, who is called Pinchalu. Pinchalu is pregnant, and Chinnamma has a monthly period. So this great epic novel ends on this note. Chinnamma and Pinchalu cease chatting and pretend to be sleeping, ensconced luxuriously in their cozy blankets. At least for those 3 days of their period, the women of Malnad have the right to this brief interlude of repose from a life of arduous labor. Isn't that so? So, writing in 1967, Kuvempu ends his novel with an issue that today we, working women, have been struggling to make it happen, and it's there. So this is just to give you a sense of how far-thinking, Kuvempu has been. And therefore, translating a text such as this by Kuvempu has really, it affords a peek into the magic of his imagination that creates a social world moored in all its complex materiality and transposes it right before your eyes to realms beyond the material. Making sense of the novel has meant dwelling in the homes and hearts of diverse characters to discover anew our common humanity. Negotiating the narrative has involved moving among the many worlds it simultaneously straddles: nature and culture, tradition and modernity, men and women, the oppressor and the oppressed, this life and the lives before and after. In short, the utterly mundane in their rich multiplicity and the supremely sublime in their cosmic unity. Rendering the text into English is to share this privilege of intimate reading with non-Kannada readers who would have missed it otherwise, a reward that has made this formidable act of translation a worthy odyssey for me. Right? Now, I'd like to read an extract, from the text, just to kind of give you a feel for the text and, and his language, his style, and all that. So, here is Gutti, a young Dalit vassal, a serf, who is in love with his own cousin, but the cousin Timmi is a vassal, a female farmhand in another, Vakaliga family. And they have, the landlords have utter control over what happens to their lives. And so Gutti is trying to snatch her away from that landlord to his own, where he is a vassal. So, in the dead of night, as Gutti and Timmi are climbing up the Hulikal peak, surrounded by the dense forests of Malnad. What is Malnad without Kuvempu, and what is Kuvempu without Malnad? So I thought I had to read this piece for you. Okay. I quote, "While the search for her is on around the settlement, Timmi briskly follows the torch ahead of her, which flares up into a bright flame and subsides into dull embers in turn as Gutti's hand moves rapidly in the dark. Where is she? Which route have they taken? Where is she headed? She does not know, nor does she care to know. Except for the flame at the tip of the torch, she can see nothing. But from the thorny bushes that scratch her, she can make out that the woods are getting thicker. When the torch flares up, she can see that the forest is dense with huge tall trees. When they pass through a water hole, she can see the glowing reflection of the torch in the water. When they cross a brook, the slush splatters on the torch, making a sizzling noise. The alarmed frogs jump into the water, making the waves dance in the torchlight. At times, the insects swarming to the fire sputter, chatpat, chatpat. Hulia, Gutti's devoted dog, darker than the dark night, is behind her one moment, ahead of Gutti the next, or on either side of the woods. That's very reassuring for her. Though she is not able to discern its shape in that darkness, once in a while, when the light falls on its face, its eyes glow like marble-sized fireflies. The path ahead of her grows steeper. Gutti's torchlight, which was level with her face, now shines above her. Her tired legs slip now and then. Her breathing grows faster. She sees that they have steered away from the trodden path now. Just at that moment, they are caught up in a frightful, blood-curdling incident. Gutti stops in his tracks. He listens keenly, his eyebrows raised, forehead stretched, air rushing into his lungs at once. In no time, his hunter's instinct grasps what is happening. Turning around sharply, he leaps aside as though his life is being snatched, drags Timmi out of sight, and shielding her body with his, pins her firmly to the trunk of a mammoth tree nearby, even as he waves his flare fiercely to make it burn brighter. The sharp tongue of fire draws wheels in the air as he waves it back and forth this way and that. The humongous tree trunk protects them at the back. The waving flare shields them in front. Gutti knows for sure that tigers or boars, bears or gores would not venture near them for fear of the waving flare. On the strength of that knowledge, he whispers, "Don't be scared, stay still." Only those who have heard the resounding roar of the big cat up close in the forest know what it means to say, plants, trees, forests, mountains, and the very earth shudder. Timmi nearly dies of fright. Her gut trembling, she is unable to stand. She collapses on her haunches at the base of the tree. But Gutti is undaunted, for he has no doubt that this danger will dissipate soon. If Gutti is trembling, it's not out of fear. If everything around Gutti, the forest, the earth, the mountains, and the rocks, appears to convulse, it is not because Gutti is trembling or that he is imagining it. Rather, the entire realm of nature, encompassing all living and non-living things, is in fact trembling. Even if there were no sentient beings to feel terrified, this fact of the entire forest quaking would have still taken place as a purely physical phenomenon in the wilderness. That is what it is like, the roar of the great tiger. Within seconds comes an equally thunderous sound, the raucous bellow of a tumultuous herd of gores, careering, pounding the earth, crushing into smithereens small plants, saplings, bushes, and shrubs under their hooves, erasing them from the face of the earth. Gutti feels as if a thunderclap is exploding in his heart. Some 10 or 20 or more gores are moving in a heavy-necked, plunging gallop, cannonballing from the hilltop down towards the mammoth tree under which Gutti and Timmi have taken shelter. Hulia bolts inside the forest and emerges to stand beside its master, fiercely barking in the direction of the gores. But the dog's bark is barely heard above the hair-raising roar of the tiger and the bone-chilling bellow of the gores. they're getting nearer. Nothing can be seen, though. All that the eye can see is the waving torch in his hand. What about the ear? It seems to have become insensible, swept away in the great flood of the thunderous sound beyond its capacity to endure. As the gores barrel down, rocks and stones and lumps of mud loosen under the impact, come flying at them, along with the wind generated by the fast movement. His nerves taut, legs planted firmly, Gutti keeps flailing the flare without respite. How on earth can the plunging gores see the solitary flare in the dark? Suddenly, a number of glittering flares, reflections of Gutti's flailing flare in the large eyes of the bison, flash across the woods. Dreading the fire, the gores instantly change course and disappear into the forest. The stream of the galloping sound takes a different course. It turns feeble, and in the next couple of minutes, most eerily, the woods fall into a deep hush. Julia's tongue, curled up in his throat, is mute, awestruck by the cataclysmic event that has just unfolded before them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chenni and Vanamala Viswanatha, for that rich exposition of Kuvempu's work. Our next speaker today is Arvind Narayan. Arvind Narayan is a lawyer and writer who is a visiting faculty member at the National Law School. He's the author of, most recently, India's Undeclared Emergency, Constitutionalism and the Politics of Resistance. He's also the co-editor of Because I Have a Voice, Queer Politics in India, and Law Like Love, Queer Perspectives on Law. He was part of the litigation team which challenged Section 377 right from the High Court to the Supreme Court. Arvind Narayan.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And a lot of my friends asked me, said, what are you doing there? These are all scholars of literature. And what is your even credibility to be on this stage at this moment in time? And really it emerged from my reading of Malegalalli Madumagalu firstly in Kannada, then with the English translation. I was sharing that with Vanamala. And then she told me that she's translating, doing another translation of Malegalalli Madumagalu. And of course, I had the opportunity to read this really magnificent translation again. And that's really the reason why I'm here. Hopefully, a little bit of my perspectives will shape the way I'm responding to the novel and to the ideas which are there in the novel itself. We've heard till now really that, I think that magnificent reading by Vanamala on what I asked her, is that your favorite chapter? When she was sharing with me, and I said, that chapter is really beautiful. It's beautiful. And the way you captured it was really, really magnificent. And going back a little bit to the novel, one part of the thematic is really the story of three love stories between three couples. Gutti and Timmi both are Dalit. Aita and Pinchalu both are Halepaika community. And Chinnamma and Mukundayya, one of whom is Nayaka and others is Gowda. And all these three love stories are set in, again, you got the sense of the breathtakingly beautiful, though deeply feudal, Malnad region. And what in a sense you get is the barriers love has to cross. The barriers are social, they're feudal, they're psychological, they're patriarchal, before the lovers are finally united. What is great, of course, of the novel is, as Vanamala puts it in the introduction, the three voices. There is the descriptive voice, the reflective voice, and the dialogic voice, and all three voices really come together. And I think if you read the novel, you'll get a sense of the beauty of place, without a doubt. And Vanamala's description brings that again to mind. But also what will happen in the course of reading the over 60 characters, coming across the over 60 characters in the novel, is that everyone will have one favorite character in the novel who's etched forever in your mind's eye. And I think very few people, including I think Professor Chenny and maybe Amit and Vanamala as well, will disagree that the favorite character, the hero of the novel, is really the dog Julia. Julia is blinded in a fight with a leopard, which is again described very powerfully, and throughout the novel described as Gutti's, the one-eyed devotee of his master Gutti. And you can see that devotion throughout. You saw it in the narration again by Vanamala. And that particular scene which Vanamala described is really about the beauty, of course, of the area and the powerfulness of the situation in which Gutti and Timmi and Julia find themselves, with the tiger's roar, the gore's bellow, and the careening down of the gores as Gutti's waving. Again, you can imagine that in your mind's eye, right? As Gutti's waving the torch round and round and hoping to God that the gores turn course, which they do. Again, see the great part about that chapter. I think that chapter again, because you can begin anywhere, you can end anywhere. Again, that's what Kuvempu says in the opening epigraph. I would think that everybody should begin with that chapter. Just begin reading that chapter, and then you get pulled in, and you're drawn back and you're drawn forwards, as it were. And if you read that chapter again, the three registers really come together. The beauty of nature, of course, is there. And the dialogic register as well, wherein you see the conversations between Timmi and Gutti. Gutti, of course, has spirited Timmi away because he's in love with her. And you see, as they ascend the peak, their love ascend, right? You see the love kind of growing as they're going up the peak. Initially, Timmi is very petulant and says that, this is awful, I'm finding it difficult to walk, etc. But as she goes past this particular episode, and as they get to Hulikal Peak, again, Dr. Chenny put it very well, you get a sense of the language of what love, or what Kuvempu describes as Rati Manmata, the story of Rati and Manmata. You get that. And again, very beautifully described, where, of course, Timmi is part of the Halipaika community, so not completely bound by Brahminical notions, but still, she has a sense of, within quotes, modesty, and says, you sleep there, I sleep here, we sleep separately. And Gutti says, but it's going to be very cold. She says, no, you sleep separately. And the description is, middle of the night, she gets up, and suddenly she feels Timmi's chest behind her and holding her tight. And she's thinking, how did that happen? She thinks for a moment, and then she relaxes back into the grip, and she feels the grip around her. And then the description is, if Julia had not been around, they would have reached the very top. And so you get that sense of, again, Julia in that entire context, as it were. That's the description of that dialogic intensity and how the love really grows. And the other part which comes in that particular context is, again, Vanamala described how Timmi has never been outside her village. Suddenly she's on the mountain peaks. She sees the entire fog, finds the beauty of the place, and completely taken in by how beautiful it is. And she kind of says very idly, she says, if we had a house here, how nice it would be. Then Gutti replies, saying, you'll have the tiger for company. And Timmi retorts, the tiger is not like you. It has a sense of decency. Referring, of course, to the events of the little while ago, as it were. So this, I think, gives you some sense of why you must really read this novel and the beauty of the entire novel. And what I think really drew me in is you get this sense of the beauty of the Malnad region with its forests and the majestic mountains. The characters also embark on the interior reflections, which plumbs the depth of the relationships between man and man, bounded as it is by caste and gender. And really, I think the one man-made institution, which is like a background, which underlies all interactions among the characters, is really that of caste. Right? And how does caste manifest in this particular novel? Again, this is really interesting to me again. That is, you see the fact that caste manifests as a language of contempt. It manifests as a language of indifference. It manifests as a performance which falls at points in time. It manifests as desire, which can sometimes, which we saw, erase the lines of caste. And it manifests as a form of really lawless violence. I'll see if we can take you through as much of this as possible in the short time that we have. When we get the starting point for me again of the question of caste and how the natural and the cultural come together is the point when the masters, in this case the Hegdes, go to the hillock, which is called Odera Dibba, go to the hillock and shout for the laborers to come. That's the description. I'll read out to you what the way Vanamala has translated. This is really beautiful. The people of the colony refer to the hillock as master's mound or Hegde's hummock, depending upon their station in life. Hereditarily bound in vassalage to the Hegde household for hundreds of years, they'd seen from their childhood the master standing on top of the hillock every morning, commanding them to start work. It seemed like a natural phenomenon. From the peaks of Master's Mound, the entire Holea settlement of 30 or 40 hutments was clearly visible as someone had ripped out its entrails. So he goes there and he shouts. And again, the point where you get a sense of the interiority of the lives of different characters is, I'm not going to read out this, but how the various characters respond to the master's shout. It's not like, just because like the sun, everybody responds and goes out immediately. No, they all have different senses. Some go slowly, some go fast, some refuse to go. So that entire description is there. I'm not going to go into that now. I'll just talk about a couple of other quick points on the way caste manifests. One is what I was referring to as the language of contempt. Again, just one extract I'll read. When the Gaudas are walking down the road, as it were, down the path, and then they suddenly see the Holeas come in. This is the description. On seeing those from the lower caste, the moment they see the elder Hegde, routinely all the men prostrate themselves before him as custom demanded. Unmindful of the thorny bushes and shrubs, the women slink away into the thick bushes, lest their sights defile the old man. So again, you see description after description of this kind of a contempt which one has by the upper caste for the lower caste. It's around the issues of food. It's around the issues of where one can sit. It's around a range of really social interaction. What I found also moving is, one is the question of contempt. There's also the very, very brilliantly described the language of indifference as a way caste manifests. This goes around the incident of the shocking murder of Dei, who is also lower caste, and she's murdered by her husband Jinkara, and then at which point the Aita, who finds out about this, runs to his masters to tell them that this is a shocking thing which has happened. I'll read to you what the way Vanamala has translated it. Aita pours out everything he has imagined, heard, seen, and known. What has taken place in Chinkara's hut in the night is so horrifying and so important for him that he assumes others would also be as shocked out of their wits. Is the death of Dei, someone he had known ever since he was a child, a trivial matter? But neither Aigalu nor Mukundayya are shocked. They mouth the words of sympathy anyone would in such circumstances. The response of the landlords is such that it makes Aita, who thinks he has brought earth-shattering news of great pain and suffering, feel ashamed of his hyper-excitement. Addressing Aigalu, Gauda says, "Give them whatever they need for the last rites." Yawning, he takes out a snuff box from his waist for a sniff. So as much as contempt is the problem, indifference is maybe even a bigger problem, of which is actually generated by caste society. What Aita is shocked by is the complete absence again of what Ambedkar would call a public conscience, which is in Ambedkar's opinion, essential condition for a democracy. Again, what do you mean by public conscience? When you feel that you're moved by the suffering of the other person. And here, that is the essential dimension which is missing. So again, in Ambedkar and his idea of a conditions precedent for the working for democracy, the essential condition is public conscience. And what caste does is destroys the very possibility of public conscience. And Kuvempu really brings this to light, really brilliantly. I'll just mention the last register of caste, since I don't think we have time to look at everything else. One last point I'll make is, while there's also, of course, what I was referring to. Caste is the idea of performance, it points its lips. Caste idea, crossing the boundaries of love, as it were, that's there as well. But I think that's still relatively contained. What you see finally, I think, which is actually where Kuvempu does a very, very important point, is where he looks at not just the question of indifference and contempt, but the ever-present possibility of brutality and violence as a part of caste power. And you get that again going back to the great scene, the great conversation with Gutti and Timmi, where Gutti, they're having this conversation with each other, and then Timmi says that, how can I forget that you almost had me crushed by the gore, says Timmi. And Gutti's response is, what do you expect? That you'd be taken on horseback like a bride? And then Timmi's response to that, but if we ride on horseback, our master will sever our legs along with our horses. They've forbidden our community from using horses. So you get that sense of almost unspeakable violence which underlies even this very conversation. And this comes true actually because this hidden subtext of lawless, uncontrollable violence, which is in the subconscious mind of Timmi, reaches the surface. In a chilling incident, which again very brilliantly described, of the lynching of Sannabira for the offense of his sister Timmi eloping with Gutti against the will of the master. I'll just read out this last part and leave it at that. Both Sanna Bira and Dodda Bira are taken to the Gauda's master, and the Gauda master, after some inquiries, revealed that Timmi has not been found, and he orders the Honnali Hodedata, the beating. What are you waiting for? Time up. As soon as Ijari Sahib gestures grimly, a quivering Sannabira obeys him, his tongue dead in his mouth, like a mute animal, like an ox that is used to following the cartman's orders when he calls out, obediently lowering his neck for the yoke to be placed. He drags his feet towards the post, looking now at the blazingly furious Gauda, and now at his poor anguished father. From the inured way he approaches the post, hugs it and holds out his hand to be tied with rope, it is clear that he knows every step in the ritual at the sacrificial altar. Like an expert, Lungi Sabi examines the bunch of tamarind birches, chooses one, he turns to Sannabira and brings the whip hard on his back, for Bira has removed his blanket as was his practice. He whips him on the buttocks, clad in a dirty dhoti. Sannabira's back swells up with the first round of lashing, and the reason the beating stops, again just read out one last part, is it stops because his mother runs in, propelled by grief, flies towards the post ululating and beating her chest, and when she snatches the switch from the Ijari Sahib's hands and flings it aside. In a twist, the mighty and cruel Ijari Sahibi lets go, feeling suddenly faint, as though he's drained of all energy. The reason is attributed to the fact that in the lowliest woman, no matter which is a holati or poor, with nothing special to commend her, can become elevated to the highest realms of immensity because of her anguished motherhood. So this sudden eruption of violence is almost like the concentrated force of the contempt, hatred, and indifference, which is almost too difficult to contain within the more genteel modes of socially accepted forms. It needs another way to express itself, and that is the lynched law, where the outward forms of justice are utilized to take forward the inward register of hatred and contempt. I think this is particularly important, this kind of a portrayal of caste violence. I go back to something which Professor Bakshi said. He said that the Ambedkar's unique contribution to the question of understanding caste is to throw light on both lawless law as well as lawless violence as an integral dimension of caste. And in this, Ambedkar is very different from Gandhi. Again, to just read what Professor Bakshi has to say, Ambedkar emerges as the most articulate, archivist of atrocities. His corpus is full of contemporary testament of Dalit suffering. Compared to this, much of the nationalist discourse is bloodless. Mahatma Gandhi's discourse, for example, on the removal of untouchability, is not haunted by a single lynched Dalit corpse or a single raped and bloody Dalit woman. The apostle of non-violence sanitized the here and now violence against untouchables and remarkably succeeded in putting the issue of untouchability on the reform agenda of Hindu social organization. The Mahatma had no such sublimating options. He portrays Hinduism as red in tooth and claw. And the fact that Kuvempu did not hesitate to portray the brutal face of caste, I think is very significant for a thinking of Kuvempu as an anti-caste thinker. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind, for this wonderful evocation of your experience of reading Kuvempu. Of course, reflecting your work in social justice as a lawyer. Our next speaker is Amit Chaudhary, author of 8 novels, the latest of which is Sojourn. He's also a poet, essayist, short story writer, and musician. His new and selected poems was published in 2023, and Faber released a full set of his backlist titles in the UK over 2022 and 2023. His works of non-fiction include, most recently, Finding the Raga, which received the James Tate Black Prize in 2022. His awards include the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Government of India's Sahitya Academy Award, the Government of West Bengal's Rabindra Purushkar, and the inaugural Infosys Prize in Literary Studies in the Humanities. He was Professor of Contemporary Literature at the University of East Anglia from 2006 to 2021, and is presently Professor of Creative Writing and Director of the Center for the Creative and Critical at Ashoka University. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and an Honorary Fellow of the Modern Language Association of America. Amit Chaudhary.
Thank you so much for introducing me to Kuvempu Vanamala, for which I have to thank Vivek Shanbag for introducing me to Vanamala. I don't feel very equipped to speak with great depth of knowledge because the introduction is a recent one to Kuvempu's work. But I will speak as a writer who has responded to a writer who has had to be a critic because I think when you embark on the path of writing, you are in a particular historical period, whenever that might be. And that historical period, it might turn out, has many aspects to it which you are in disagreement with. From this begins the kind of thought that goes into criticism and self-examination to do with why you are writing in the way you are. And if you are writing about certain themes, why you are writing about them in the way you are, and why you are not limited to themes alone, and why themes cannot define you as a writer. I think these are crucial, questions to all moderns from the 19th century onwards, or from the Enlightenment onwards, from the European Enlightenment onwards, which underlines the importance of the human being as an agent who is capable of freeing themselves through thought and action, and the limitations, the liberations, and the radical kind of possibilities created by this underlining, and the limitations of this particular underlining, the emphasis, the centrality of the human. And writing fiction, writing poetry in the time of modernity that I'm talking about, in which It is the human being who's at the center of the universe. And that presents us with immense possibility. But it is an ambiguous kind of gift, this possibility. Is the subject of the note of dissent that the imagination often sounds. The way an academic talks about caste is not going to be the way a novelist talks about caste. In fact, what does a novelist talk about? We have to figure this out. Having said all this, I would say that I was delighted and happy and surprised at the number of things which were said by people, which, including favorite characters, etc., and passages and chapters, which exactly chimed in with my experience of the novel. Julia, the dog, what an exceptional being. The chapter to which you referred to, where Gutti and Timmi, is that are going through the forest at night. But you refer to that chapter as well. But by then it's becoming light, and she says, "What is that? It looks like a frothy ocean." And you refer to this moment. And the frothy ocean is fog, I think. These are extraordinary moments in the first 150 pages of the book, which itself, by the way, is an extraordinary achievement, those first 150 pages on the part of Kuvempu, and done great justice to by Vanamala. Listening to these speakers, I was saying that I was struck by how much what they said chimed in with what I felt. But this is not to say that literature is some sort of tepid or bland universal entity. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4 is a universal. Literature, Julia is not a universal in that way. What is Julia then? Because he liked Julia, she liked Julia, but it's not 2 + 2 = 4. What is Julia? We all seem to be susceptible to the same kind of cravings, susceptible to the same forms of beauty, of which Julia is one. And these forms of beauty are not the accepted forms of beauty. Julia is not the accepted form of beauty. So we have formed a secret community that has uncovered in itself this susceptibility. So it's not a universal that we're talking about. We're talking about the formation of a community of readers who understand at the moment of reading that what they thought about beauty or this or that is not is susceptible to complete transformation, in which we are willing to take part. We are willing to take part, this secret community that is formed here after reading Kuvempu recently, in this transformation of what we thought were stable categories. Kuvempu is at a very, I'll come to the novel in a second, or maybe in a few seconds. But Kuvempu is at a very interesting sort of position as a writer in terms of what might be called important preoccupations for the 19th and 20th century middle classes, the educated classes in India. On the one hand, there is the question of reform and of the progressive. So we as Indians looking at injustice around us, as Kuvempu does, will react, and this is a wonderful aspect of who we have been, and this progressive self. It's arguable as to when this post-enlightenment progressive self comes into being. One possible date is around 1828, the formation of the Brahmo Samaj, the reform movements with Ram Mohan Roy and others against, Sati. Sati is an important moment, but then there are various other moments in which the Indian self emerges as quasi-citizen, not as a subject of the British, but as quasi-citizen, as activist, as progressive. Then by the 1860s, this quasi-citizen self has also become a hegemony, far closer than to the self, to the imagination, than the British. And so literature begins to attack this self and make fun of it. So one of the first instances of this is 1894, when Rabindranath Tagore writes an essay on children's nursery rhymes, Bengali nursery rhymes. And he contrasts his own enthusiasm for Bengali children's nursery rhymes with his contemporaries, who are also collecting vast archives of oral material from Bengal. And he says they're doing wonderful work, but their interest is not the same as my interest. My interest in nursery rhymes is because these nursery rhymes the lines do not follow each other logically, and they make room for the superfluous. This is one of the first times in thinking and in literary thought that this kind of this idea of the importance of the superfluous is being brought up. That which he says is irrelevant, anavashyak, avashyak, anavashyak, fragmentary, flying around. These are the images that he finds in these Bengali nursery rhymes, and he gives us examples. One line has no relation to the other. The third line has no relation to the second. How did what happened in the fourth line happen when nothing in the first three lines was leading up to that? He's deeply interested in confronting the superfluous and positing it against this, what he sees as a somewhat tyrannical self. And this tyrannical self believes in important things, thinks in a linear way, is not the colonizer, is a kind of quasi-progressive. He calls this self the Shojag self, the wide-awake self. He wants the self to be drowsy. It looks like Tagore wants the self not to be so wide awake. Absorption is a different form of consciousness, and Kuvempu has it. He has both the reformist, wide-awake consciousness and the absorbed consciousness. The consciousness that forgets about what is at hand and becomes absorbed in something for that moment. So, in this sense, Kuvempu is wonderful to encounter and is a salutary reminder as to how novelists write about their worlds, which might include various things, including many of the things that have been mentioned here, the wonders of the universe, the injustices of human beings, how they always make room for the superfluous, and how nothing is superfluous. I mean, to quote from what you read out, the epigraph, it's a radical realignment. in the world of Indian writing in English, in the last 30 years, our vocabulary has become too shojag, too awake. We don't understand anymore, we don't have the vocabulary anymore for this tension with the superfluous that makes us truly free. We cannot be free without this space given to the unnecessary. Kuvempu then, therefore, is a salutary reminder of how we might re-engage with our own thought, the hierarchies of our own thought, of our most well-intentioned thought. We have to confront this when reading him. We might try to retranslate Vanamala's translation into our own concepts, the concepts that make us comfortable. But they are not true. Vanamala, whatever Vanamala's conceptual parameters are, but as a translator, she has been true to Kuvempu's shifting text, which is challenging our fixed conceptual parameters as Indian liberals. And as Indian liberals, we have been left with a very narrow vocabulary in the last 30 years, which is why it is a good thing to be reintroduced to Indian writers who have written in their own languages because of the amount of play that's happening there. Not having to write about India like people who write in English do. They're always aware of India. Being sort of loosed, untethered from this obligation leads to a kind of freedom and play. And that freedom is a very important freedom. The freedom to ignore India, let us say, as a subject. Coming to the novel, a few things. The first 150 pages cover, I don't know what the time span is, but it's very short. When we think of Tolstoy, or when we think of the 19th century novel, we are looking at a particular achievement of the 19th century novel, which is the emergence of a life arc and the passing of that life arc. Frank O'Hara said the short story is more interested in the moment, and therefore he called Ulysses a big short story, because it is preoccupied with the moment. The moment over there becomes amplified into a day, but no more. But he said the 19th century novel gives us a life arc. We see the reality of a life, and we also see its unreality in the end, because it ends. Anna Karenina started out, as something. This was their ambition, and then it ended. And it took him 600 pages or so to give us that sense of reality through realism and unreality, through the essential transitoriness of a life and a society and a moment in society. But Kuvempu doesn't go about his business in this way. He spends 150 pages talking about Gutti traveling, and then various things that are happening in the travel are seen from different moments, like the escape of a wild boar, or of a boar or a pig. It comes up at different moments from different perspectives, and everybody is kind of immersed in that now of the pig, leading up to that now and in that now. Various things inform these first 150 pages that expand time in a way very unlike the 19th century novel. One thing that the first 150 pages taught me was the humanist idea that the human being needs to be the protagonist of a novel gives way here to something else. And also, a linear time gives way here to the embrace of the random. Nothing is dwelt upon for too long. There is this, there is that, but each one is embraced for a moment, and then something else is embraced. Among these are these so-called extraordinary transcendental moments where, let's say, he says, the narrator says, you have in your skin a particular kind of memory that not only goes back to your childhood, but maybe to your previous birth. He says this, and he lets it go, and he goes into something else, maybe a pigsty or something else. In the pigsty, when the pigs begin to move with great agitation towards the exit, he says these are like souls, yearning for moksha. He lets that go, and then he goes to the next moment. So the moment of transcendence is one moment among others. It is not as one would be led to believe by our own more comfortable and comforting education that in the end there is the moment of transcendence, or behind everything is the moment of transcendence. No. The moment of transcendence is one truth among various truths. This is how Kuvempu deals with it. And that itself is an aesthetic, narrative, and spiritual position. That itself is a position that the novel brings to life and light. One thing that Vanamala read out, and I think I'll end it with remarking on what I'm saying and remarking on what she read out. There was one line, the tiger, the presence of the tiger and the tiger's roar sets everything trembling, right? And there's one very interesting statement there, which he develops on, Kuvempu develops on, which shows his deep intelligence and his project. So he says, Gutti was trembling, but not out of fear. So trembling and movement, these are things which are transformative. Movement is transformative. In Ovid, of course, movement, somebody is chasing somebody else and the person gets transformed. That is metamorphosis. Over here, an antelope or a deer shoots out of the forest as if it had been flung from a sling like a pellet. And there are many such images. There is always movement. Movement implies transformation from moment to moment of narrative, of our categories. Nothing is fixed. This trembling without fear is literature. Roland Barthes calls it the trembling of existence. He says, he quotes the poet and critic Paul Valéry, and he notes Paul Valéry's slightly contemptuous statement about the novel. He says, Paul Valéry says, the novels always begin with a statement like, the Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock. The moment we hear this statement, the Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock, we are plunged into the past tense, the simple past tense, and the unreal time of the novel. Not only novel, he says, of the novel, of histories and cosmogonies. Ram Mohan Roy was standing at a window in 1878, or whatever, Of course, you would have been quite tiny then, but the young Ram Mohan was standing then at a window, and 17 minus 100 years, 1785. You'd still be quite young. So when you read a biography, it starts in that unreal time of what Barthes identifies as the simple past tense. And he says this simple past tense lulls us and suppresses the trembling of existence. And here what we have is this trembling without fear. And I think this agitation, this excitement characterizes the novel's project. Over and above any single character or theme it might make part of its canvas, everything is agitated and trembling without fear even. That means there is no, but when he says, Gutti was trembling, but in that context of the tiger, but trembling without fear, the trembling therefore does not have an immediate cause. It is a causeless kind of agitation, or an agitation that cannot be connected to a particular theme, a particular interpretation. So, I think Kuvempu gives us a lot, gives us a portrait, gives us much to think about, but also not just through humor and wonder, which are all there, but through a deep intelligence, refutes the comfort we might feel in our usual ways, the ways in which we've been educated to think about these things. So, Vanamala, thank you for introducing this to us. I hope it is part of a larger and ongoing conversation to do with Kuvempu, Kannada literature, various literatures outside of English, in the last 150 years, but also about what these writers actually wanted to also make us rethink how we think about things we talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit, for drawing out the philosophical, historical, cultural, and literary questions in the text, and also the connections to literatures from other parts of the world and the country. I think we have some time for a couple of questions. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 and combine them. Any questions?
Thank you, Vanamala, for this opportunity for people who don't read Kannada to read Kuvempu. I think it's just huge. And your translation, as many people have already pointed out, really highlights all the kind of complexity and nuance that is in Kuvempu. I just wanted to draw attention, the excerpt that you published, that we had the honor of publishing in out of print from the translation. One thing that's very significant in it is, words that I picked up from all of you. Cosmos, it's really creating a little. It highlights a world. Even in that one chapter, you have all the communities. You have multiplicity of characters. You have a mass of people. You have individual people. That all come to the fore. But what's also very significant is something that all of you referred to is the humor, and it's this episode where. Somebody is learning to ride a bicycle. But it seems like a simple thing, but it's really about a community, modernism, it's about the missionary, it's got everything nuanced in there. So I don't really have a question, but in a sense I would really appreciate your comment on that segment. Yeah.
Starting from the description of the bicycle itself, they call it bicycle. It's so new. The community, they don't pronounce it as bicycle, but as bicycle, because they know this chakki. That's a familiar implement for them, and so they keep imagining. They're yet to go there and see the man learning the bicycle. So on the way, there is this conversation happening among them. So the moment he steps on the ring, it's supposed to fly. How come our chakki does not fly? You know, all these kinds of very telling comments about how they're trying to come into grips with modern, technology and so on. So I think you, as you explained already, it's one of those scenes where it is not just learning the bicycle, which is funny enough in itself, but there are comments like this, for instance, the priest thinks, like everybody wants to see what is happening there. So forgetting their own caste divisions, they all, they're all upon each other, trying to say, let me see. And so he says, the bicycle seems to be a good breaker of caste barriers rather than anything else, right? So such comments are very, very telling, So there are levels and levels of, there's a very physical description, and on top of it, there is a very anthropological kind of a description of things. And also the whole angle of how the servants are made to pull the, the bicycle on both sides, as if they are oxen or something. So all those things are, it's a very rich, very multiple leveled kind of narrative, which, you must read. I'm sure you'll enjoy that terribly. It's so rich and so complex. Thank you.
I haven't read the novel, but for example, Bankim, his writing is, there's a lot of cultural nationalism in it, if I'm not mistaken. What about Kuvempu? How does he deal with pluralism? Do minorities figure among his characters? Or how does he approach it? I mean, particularly in the context of today's India, this is very important.
I think all of us mentioned the fact that the very canvas of fiction is expanded mainly because of the way in which so many communities are represented in the novel. Not just the hierarchical order of the society, but also those experiences which are so very specific, so very distinctive of communities. That happens here in Kuvempu. I don't think there is anything that would resemble cultural nationalism in the novel. There's one framework, of course, which has to be taken very seriously. This is the framework represented by Vivekananda, in the shifts of space and time. When something is happening here, the local so-called native padre is moving in. We are taken to Chicago, where Vivekananda is making his very famous speech. Though this framework is there in the novel, Kuvempu uses it in order to convince the readers that you may never be able to very rationally explain how things are connected, So it doesn't become a vehicle for cultural nationalism. Though, of course, here and there are comments that, there should be a resistance to the conversion by the missionaries. I, as a reader, didn't find much of evidence for cultural nationalism in Kuvempu. What's most important, I thought, was these hierarchies, which are a basis of cultural nationalism, are deconstructed in the novel, in many ways. That's how I would interpret the novel by Kuvempu and all his other writings also.
Good evening, Dr. Vanamala. I've waited for this for so long since we heard. I'm from Malnad myself, and I think I had a smile from this end to that end. And I'm also a Jungian, so when Professor Chenny started with, there's a Jungian lens as in the collective unconscious and the depth. Being a psychologist, I'm also wondering, these novels needs to come out into the younger adult, into our syllabus, I feel like. And this dialoguing, I feel like, not just the older adults, but I feel like the way the shift and the play that you were talking of, and the many layers which is there, right? Which is what we kind of look in as, psychoanalysts and Jungian analysts. So it's I don't have a question per se, but I really want to, thank you, and just wanted your impression on what do you feel about this. We need to go beyond just what we are currently seeing in the education system, but because to me, Kuvempu is, like a romantic, right? Like I feel so connected back to my homeland, and there's that hope, and like the novel, there's also the aspects of what's not so great there, like, or in the society per se. So I feel like, how do we open up these dialogues in the society, in the younger, generation and youth is my question.
Well, it's a very broad question, but to answer it with just a small example, his Kuvempu's sense of humor is something that not many people have, critics highlighted much. But this novel is interspersed with such diverse kinds of humor. For instance, there's a small scene where all the children, the boys are all playing together, but one of the children has a mother who is slightly deranged, and so he's, another child refers to her as the mad woman or something like that. And so this fellow is very upset. So, while the other boy apologizes, it doesn't make him any less sad for that reason. So then, one of the other smallest one, so Kuvempu writes, there was a little feeble voice which piped up and said, see, when if God prays, even the devotee can give him a boon. It's obviously a spoonerism, okay? So then all the children laugh at that joke. So that breaks the tension of that moment for the children. So it's a very small, very innocuous kind of a mistake by a toddler, a little older than a toddler. So, Bhagavanta pratsidre, bhakta vara kotte kortane gotta, anta kannadadalli. So it's so cute, that kind of using small things like that. So I'm very kind of amazed at the Kuvempu's ability to find humor in the ordinary. And there is this Kannada Pandita, a person who was, migrated from Kerala. And so his Kannada is accented with Malayalam. So he says, Kutti for Gutti. So I kind of extended it to say, for bridegroom, I said bridegroom. So and things like that. So I have, this play is something that play with language, that you're invited by most literary texts for into this play, but even more so with a magician like Kuvempu, where there's so much wordplay, and I think that is something that should interest youngsters no end. I can tell you that as the mother of 3 grandkids, all the time this is what we play, and it's fun.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to request, I think there are a couple of questions, so if you could club your questions together, and that'll be the last 2.
Actually, I have a request more than a question which came out from getting the novel to young people. You have a lovely voice, but Malaji, why don't you add your novel to Audible? Read it out.
Yeah, maybe, why not? Maybe I'll try at least some excerpts, important excerpts we could.
Whole thing. Whole hog.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the compliment.
And Professor Chaudhary, I was wondering, when you talk about superfluous, I think one of the most superfluous things in today's times are Hindi movies. And I spent a lot of time watching Hindi movies. So would you say I've really, spent time on the superfluous?
Go ahead with your question.
Vanamala, I have I'm here. I just wanted to ask you, because we've talked obviously of Kuvempu's language and his writing and ability, and I'm so happy that I can read it in translation. I wanted to ask you, because you then you have his writing and his vocabulary, and then you have to think of the English equivalent. Yes. No easy task, no. You know? And as Amit Chaudhary has mentioned about modern English writing, the vocabulary has changed, etc. But you had to bring out English vocabulary to his language. I want to ask you, how did you do that? How tough was it for you? I know it's taken you over two years to write it. But
Yeah. I think, Sudhi here, with whom I have been in conversation about the text, and who has made some critical comments and offered some help with reading and some of the rewriting. In our conversation, it transpired that first you translate from Kannada to English. That's the first step. So where you are still pulled back by the Kannada, because your fidelity, your sense of loyalty, your sense of wanting to recreate that effect, so you're still very much part of the Kannada. Then you kind of put it aside. You make sure, okay, you've got the sense, the tone, the mood, and so on. You put it away. Then you reread it and into English. So then there is another level of translation from English to English, right? And that is the stage which is very tough, where it has to read independently as a text. And yet, for instance, you can't say ayo in any other language, right? So, are, all these things, these are very difficult to translate. And especially if you want to create different voices in your narrative. The Kanna Pandita speaking in one kind of voice, and there is this Marathi Manja says, ha, that kind of lilting, tonality. All this is what marks that person. If I kind of, take it out to make it very English, then you're losing that character, you're losing that voice. So it's always, always, always a balancing act. Where do you want to give up? Because you have to give up some things. But where do you want to keep? What is important? So I think communicability, you have one foot in communicability, you have the other foot in fidelity. And then you are balancing all the time and hoping that you still are balanced, right? That is translation for you. And thank you for the question.
May I? Just a very quick, I know I'm on extra time, so I'll be extremely brief, but I thought I should be true to my vocation, at least as a scholar in 19th century Bengali literature, to just make the point to a largely predominant Kannada audience that Bankim Chandra Chatterjee is not only about cultural nationalism. Just to make that point, just because, of course, anybody, and I'm sure all of you are familiar, but if you his first novel, Kopal Kundola, if you read the women-centric novels, Rajani, Indira, the worlds that you have described of Kuvempu, and I think what makes any writer great, as has come out from all of your discussion, absorption in the world. Without that, he would not have been the great writer that he was. So just to make that small correction, that Bankim Chatterjee is not only about Anandamot or cultural nationalism, he's actually a writer who needs, I think, also translation and presentation, something that you have done so brilliantly. It would be wonderful if you would.
Yes.
But
it was my fantasy to learn Bengali.
She asked a question about whether her habit of watching Hindi films is...
You can take a mic. Take the mic.
No, I'm saying that she asked a question about to do with her habit of watching Hindi movies. So whether that qualifies you as a connoisseur of the superfluous. To connect this to something, Hindi movies, let me try and be as quick as possible, but Hindi movies have been studied now in the aftermath of the, let's say, the golden age of the Hindi film, which would have been the 50s and 60s, they've been studied from the cultural studies era in this new sort of academic interest, new meaning going back to the 1990s, in popular culture. So we are not that far away from the era in which Rabindranath is looking around him and seeing people collecting the oral archive, but doing so for a kind of sociological reason. And this is not to denigrate the seriousness and the indispensability of the task with which these people were creating an oral archive. But there was a higher reason that we must showcase orality, we must show the colonizer or whatever, ourselves, that our oral culture, our fairy tales, our children's stories are no less rich than those that exist in Britain. And now with cultural studies, there has been an emphasis that, high culture is dead. We must look at popular culture. Tagore is unconcerned about these debates when he says, look at the superfluous in these poems. And to Tagore's comment about the superfluous, and I'm sure there are today in some Hindi films a greater enshrining of the superfluous than in various other instances. Like those barren patches in Khosla Ka Ghosla, for instance. Where they bought a property which they are no longer in control of. If you remember, I don't know if you've seen this film, I would recommend to add to your leisure time of inculcating the superfluous by watching the first two Dibakar Banerjee films. They're full of the superfluous. But I would say that capturing the superfluous is a very difficult thing. That Kuvempu has done it is a feat. It's a very difficult thing. You can't just do it by watching Hindi movies. I'm sure you can maybe. That might be one of the ways of doing it. But that is not a surefire way of doing it. So with Dibakar Banerjee, he does it in his early movies. It's a difficult thing to pull off. The percentage with which it happens either in art house cinema or in Hindi films, in popular culture or in so-called serious culture is as small, the percentage rate of success, whether it's with somebody like early films Dibakar Banerjee or Manikal, the percentage rate of success is equally small in popular culture as it is in serious culture. Being serious or being popular does not guarantee that you have a better grasp on the superfluous. It eludes you.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but Vanamala, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that last question.
About the
From Rusink.
No, that is more of a comment.
Yeah.
So
on Bonkim.
Yeah.
Did you want to respond to it?
But no, I don't have a particular response. I think it's worth staying with that thought and trying to look at Bankim from other lenses. That's what, yeah.
I was actually commenting on the way in which Bankim's novels traveled to Marathi and then came to Kannada. And if you read Galaganatha, a very popular novelist in Kannada, you will see the other side of Bankim. That's what I was trying to say. The way in which the model traveled and came to Kannada. That's what I was emphasizing.
So thank you all. One has the sense of this rich repository of life in the Malnad region, which I think today's discussion, you'll have added to this vast treasure house. So thanks to all the panelists for showing us more reasons to celebrate and remember Kuvempu, and to Vanamala Viswanatha for this brilliant translation. Congratulations. Vanamala will be signing books outside. Thank you all for coming, and good night.